Hi, my name is Jeffrey Weiss. I'm a member of the AIMS Coalition Against Apartheid, and I would like to welcome you all here to the Africa Peace Tour. The three individuals on my left have really had quite a busy day. We got them up at early this morning and took them to Ames High School for an address that they gave in a history classroom. And it was quite interesting, the questions that the students had about Africa, and I think that the students learned a lot today from the exchange. Then around 3 o'clock, they started interviewing with the alternative media here, and we shot a video that will be available for you all to watch on Channel 32. So tonight we are glad that they still have energy to address this audience, and I am told that they can go for a while to answer the questions you might have about Africa. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce the three individuals on my left. Francisco Campbell is an associate at the Center for International Studies at the Central American University in Managua, Nicaragua. Jamie Tyson on my far left is a member of the Friends Society and was recently in South Africa visiting with the Quakers and with all of the people in South Africa, in Soweto. Mohammed Abu Darahim is American Friends Service Committee member, director of a non-governmental agricultural organization working in and around Somalia, and he just returned from Somalia recently. The objective of the Africa Peace Tour is to bring to the United States citizens information and awareness of what is taking place on the African continent. It is incumbent upon us who say that we live in a democracy to find proper information, because the information that we usually receive about Africa is very distorted through our mainstream media, and we will learn more about that tonight. So without further ado, I would like to turn the program over to Francisco here to my immediate left, and after the lecture we will open it up with a question and answer discussion, and we also invite you to help yourself to any of the materials back there on the table.
It's a pleasure to be here and have the opportunity to share with you some of our insights or points of view on the situation in Africa specifically, and also the situation as relates to the developing countries of the world and their relations to the developed North. Before asking Abdul to come here and talk to you a little bit about the situation, the conditions in Somalia, where he's from, I believe it is useful to say a little bit about the Africa Peace Tour, and I just see that our director is here. Jerry, come on up and tell the people about the Africa Tour. Jerry had to go. Where did you go, Jerry? Had to go to Dubuque to bring our colleague from South Africa, a representative of the ANC who flew in from Johannesburg in order to be here. So, Jerry, we are just getting started, and we thought it would be useful to explain a little bit about the Peace Tour, Africa Peace Tour, and no one better than you to do that. Jerry Herman.
Thank you, my good brother Francisco Campbell. I'd like to apologize for being late, but we just had a long drive to Dubuque and then Des Moines and back. The Africa Peace Tour is a coalition of 12 national organizations, actually some are international, that work on Africa, either in Africa on the ground, in aid and development, or in this country trying to influence our government to reverse current policy on Africa. In fact, to reverse it, to reach out to the peoples of Africa and be supportive rather than to use the current North-South relationship, that is an exploitive relationship, dipping into the South, taking out resources at a unbelievably exploitive way. So that's what we, as the Africa Peace Committee, we decide the kinds of overall, but in a very gentle way, policy for the peace tour. There's the American Friends Service Committee, Oxfam, Africa Faith and Justice Network, Mennonite Central Committee, good solid organizations. We don't put a lot of money into it, as these folks will attest, as I drag them around the country, and they say that I don't feed them well, and it's true. They're fantastic folks who work very hard. Last night we didn't get in until 12 o'clock, and I can say to them that will again happen tonight, and I will again get them up at 6 o'clock and drive up to Emmitsburg and Estherville. But the point really is that they respond to a need, that our media in this country give us very little serious information on Africa. These folks know the continent. They talk about the aspirations and the needs in ways that I think folks who live in this country, citizens, can feel and reach out to and understand in ways that they have the same kinds of aspirations and needs in this country. We're trying to develop an African constituency, though that is those folks who care about Africa, who are willing to work to influence what takes place there that our government engages in. For example, in Chicago this past weekend we did the Operation Push program on Saturday, which goes out to 4 stations, arguing, for example, because people want to know about Winnie and Nelson. But we try to provoke a little bit in the sense saying Winnie it's been alleged that she was involved in the killing of 2 people. These are allegations. But we want to keep things in perspective in the sense that the South African government over the last 15 years has aided in the taking of the lives of 2 million people in Southern Africa. Which is more important, please? So we're trying to get Americans to understand that as the media attempts to direct us to engage in folks' personal troubles, divorces, separations, allegations, no, we don't want to talk about that. We want to talk about the killing of 2 million people in Southern Africa, 1 million in Mozambique, and the ravaging continues in Angola. What does it mean, for example, as our government aided in that destruction in Angola, to give the weapons, the mines, the bombs that would take out a juncture in Angola? Down the road to the juncture, which branched off in 3 directions, medicine trucks, food trucks were trying to get through. They couldn't get through. The result of that, greater death. In the period 1980 to 1988, 500,000 children died. Which is more important? They keep talking to us about the trivial, not the serious. So we want to talk about that which we think is serious, and I think really that most Americans do. And I didn't come to make a speech. But it gets me a little bit, I think, going when people have these strange kind of notions about what's important and what ought to be discussed and to go on and gossip. We want to take Americans to reverse U.S. policy, that we ought to be leaning hard on the de Klerk government. They have to be pushed out of power. But instead, our government has been arguing because of the drought in Southern Africa, that it might be a good thing in the sense that they don't want to give up bilateral aid, government to government, but they want to give aid to SADC and then argue. That's the 10 organizations that were put together to try to lessen the dependence on South Africa. And argue with those folks that the current South African government ought to be included. This government has killed 2 million people in that region. So understand what's taking place. I'd like to introduce our first speaker, who is a colleague of mine, who's going to talk about the Horn. He's going to talk about Somalia, his country. And he has been there. It's his first time in this country. He's been here less than 2 months, driving out across the flatlands of Iowa. He wondered about how much corn is grown. Are people hurting? And I'm thinking about what I know about him because he's been working in Somalia, a country virtually leveled by a 10-year civil war. The capital city virtually in ruins. Ceasefires have come and gone. And he sits here with us tonight in Ames. I know he must be looking out a strange pair of glasses at us, at what he sees after seeing so much destruction. I bring you Mohammed Abdurrahman.
Good evening, sisters and brothers. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. It is a pleasure to me to be in Iowa State. I came to the state and I have been in the state for 2 months only, and it's my first time to the state. I am thanking here for American Friends Service Committee, which is my organization, which sponsored me to bring to the state and address to the U.S. people and explain the situation and the problems and the conditions in my country. In general, East Africa, and particularly in my country. Secondly, I am thanking to Jerry Herman and my other sisters and brothers who are my colleagues, who will participate for this journey, peace to journey. I'm thanking to them. I'm thanking to you for your participation and allowing me to speak in here. Okay. After that, let me talk the Horn or the East Africa in general, then come down to the Somalia. As far as you know, for example, Sudan, there is still a civil war in Sudan. In Sudan, where there is a lot of thousands of people are losing their lives every day and night. And now you didn't hear anything about the newspapers, about the TVs, about the mass media. Ethiopia is the same, and Somalia is the worst. To come down to Somalia have been involving a movement war, let me put in that way, a movement war for the last 10 years. And it was in a civil war for the last year. The movement war was involving for a groups who sacrificed themselves to overthrow the former regime. Unfortunately, when they overthrew the former regime in 1991, January, it happened that instead of their unification, instead of uniting, they split. And being before for 4 movements, they are more than a dozen right now. And that is what caused the civil war right now. And before it was a movement war or guerrilla war against one regime. This civil war, thousands of people are dying every day, and hundreds, mainly women and children, are getting wounded because of the crossfire. And in the United States community, you don't know anything about that, but you hear and you listen and you see the magazines, the TVs, what is happening in East Europe. Therefore, it seems that the whole continent of Africa is ignored. Is ignored from the United States government, because the United States government is the only one, the only power today in the world. No challenge, no any other power which is against the U.S. government right now, since it has been defeated, the Eastern power, saying that from 10 years before or 10 years back right to now, there is a civil war in my country. There is no food, there is no drugs, there is no medication, there is nothing in the country. Besides that, there is a plenty of weapons, bullets full of the warehouses. Why is that? Because the Eastern were donating to us weapons instead of humanitarian service. The Western, including the U.S., were donating to us weapons, and putting all together, keeping in warehouses, still we are keeping, and that is what resulted this civil war. And what is resulted? All these people who lost their lives, or those who got wounded, to get because of that aid assistance. The aid assistance was not the humanitarian aid assistance, but it was a destructive humanitarian assistance. Recently I came from Somalia, and really I visited, when I was coming to the state, several hospitals. You could find some wounded people who are laying in the hospital yards. You could find some of wounded people who are suffering, who have not got any money or any income, who could not afford to get, medication. They cannot buy it. And you could find a doctor who is searching a patient or a wounded person who is cutting here and there, trial and error, to get out the bullet, because there is no X-ray films. And if there is X-ray films, the problem is there is no fuel for generators. And in that condition, I visited a center which lives an orphanage girls, very young, 3 years of age, orphanage girls. They were orphanage and they became double orphanages. The former dictatorship regime was taking care of them. The former regime left. No government structure in the country. They are suffering. They don't have got parents. They don't have got anyone who takes care of them. Therefore, a lot of that problems, American Foreign Service Committee used to deal or to address development programs before in Somalia and other countries in Africa, as well as Asia. Therefore, an FSC right now decided to participate this relief emergency, and we decided to assist those orphanage girls as well as some hospitals in the capital city. I am saying the capital city, but the rest of the country is the same. The same. No area is better than the other. In terms of war, in terms of starvation, in terms of every kind of humanitarian service. There is no humanitarian service. There is no, no education system at all. No life system. Simply with which I could conclude my presentation, which is very small, very short, but I think carrying very big message to you as a U.S. people. As American Foreign Service Committee, we are seeking a fund to respond those problems and seeking fund from where? From you. Thank you a lot.
Thank you, Brother Abdurrahman. The next speaker, Jamie Tyson, is a friend, a Quaker, who's been in South Africa, came back in March, was there for 3 months. She has something to talk to you about that's so devastating and that has not appeared in our media virtually at all. But she worked very close to information that reporters in South Africa should have picked up and should have reported to the whole world, because it will give us serious cause to wonder about where CODESA is going, where the de Klerk government is going, what motivates that government. It's especially given the level of violence. You know that there was great euphoria last month when the elections took place. That's virtually 68% of the voting, of those who voted in favor of continuing to search for a new constitution. But since that date, the 17th, over 500 people, 500 casualties, people who have died since then in the African community. And Jamie wants to talk to you a bit about that.
Good evening, my brothers and sisters. When Jerry asked if I would speak on the African Peace Tour, I felt humbled and grateful, because I really feel I have something to say to the people of the United States. I spent from late November until early March in South Africa. I toured the country and stayed with families. I put about 3,000 miles underneath me, and returned to Cape Town to work as a mediator, training mediators in the townships to use conflict resolution skills. I worked primarily in Nyanga Township, outside of Cape Town. Nyanga is a township that is being torn apart by the Taxi War. I was involved with the monitoring groups in Nyanga, monitoring the violence that was going on. And there were some things that happened that I feel we need to know here. Here we hear a lot about factional violence, tribal violence, black on black violence. And my brothers and sisters, that is not true. What came out in the press in South Africa while I was there was the beginning of unearthing the Third Force. The Third Force is the arm of the secret police that has been working to destabilize the African community in South Africa, with the premise that if they successfully destabilize the African community, then they cannot mobilize themselves to take control of their own country. Ben Conradi came forward with the information that he was a part of this Third Force. He gave names of the consultancies that were the front organizations for this Third Force. The Weekly Mail reporters Anton Heber and Gay Davis, who I had the opportunity to work with, pardon me? I had the opportunity to work with, unearth the connections between the government and this third force. What happens is that educational consultancies, primarily a consultancy known as Creed Consultancies, and church organizations are set up as fronts in the townships. They solicit unaligned youth and win their support and then train them to be assassins and turn them loose back in their own communities. And they perpetrate acts of violence which cause the community to turn inward on itself. Over and over again, I saw that while I was there and lost 5 colleagues to assassination during a period of a little over 3 months. So I am here to tell you that even though it looks on the leadership level as though things are changing, things are not changing for the people of South Africa. And as the New York Times says, apartheid is over. No, apartheid is not over. My brother Francisco says that the de Klerk government is working to take away the stench of apartheid, but not to change that apartheid that is economically profitable for the white minority in South Africa. And that is exactly what is happening. The people of South Africa are still actively involved in their resistance. Things would happen in Nyanga. One night, 300 shacks went up in flames. 25 people were killed. And the police were there in their Caspers watching this take place. And as the shacks went up in flames, they got onto their loud hailers and laughed. None of that gets back here into our press. One morning in Nyanga, after monitoring the terminus, 2 young children were shot in the crossfire on their way to school. The next day, the women of Nyanga East blocked the roads and did not allow the taxis to enter their townships. They put their bodies between themselves, between their children, these taxis, and Caspers. Later, the women chased the police out of Nyanga Township by stripping their clothes and running ululating at the police. We don't hear of these acts of resistance. We hear of what is happening with CODESA and the leadership level. We don't hear of how Inkatha is used as a tool to destabilize the Natal region. We don't hear those kind of things. And I think we need, as Americans, to ask why. Why aren't we hearing this? Why isn't our press telling us the truth? We need to realize that our press is owned by our conglomerates, our multinational conglomerates here, and they are invested in not giving us the truth, for they too want to keep the economic advantages of apartheid in place. But as American citizens, we need to demand to know the truth. We need to demand to know what is happening to our African brothers and sisters. For our freedom rests upon their freedom. And after living in the African community in South Africa for the time that I was there, I needed to come home and question the way I lived my life and what in my life was complicit here in the North with causing the oppression of my brothers and sisters. So that is why I'm speaking about this, and that is why I am willing to call to task the American media on this. We need to hear the truth, and the truth is not being told.
Let me also thank you for coming out tonight. It's a good crowd, and I hope you take some of these messages back, especially the North-South concern, as well as the need to get our media to cover the stories in Africa and especially at this time in South Africa. The next speaker is a great and good friend who went home after 31 years in exile back to Bloemfontein and just arrived to be on the tour on Friday in Chicago. He is an African National Congress member and has virtually always been. Chuping Kwapoge.
Good evening. I'm glad to be with you this evening. There's one thing that Jerry forgot to mention, and that is that I've been a member of this peace tour every year for the past 6 years. Now you can imagine that this year I almost missed the tour. Fortunately, Jerry realized that the American community, the same community that supported us up to this junction, the same community that supported us to the point where de Klerk was forced to change course and decide to negotiate. That was not a change of heart, it was a change of the power. I left last year, first week of October. I arrived in Bloemfontein on the 4th of October. After 31 years. You all know what it means, or you can imagine what it means after having spent 31 years without hope of ever returning home again. Although the determination was there not to give up hope, we tried at times, some of us, to be realistic. We said South Africa is powerful, militarily and economically. And on top of that, it was supported by powerful allies, including one of the one of the most powerful countries in the world today. I almost said great. I shouldn't say great because now we're talking about the New World Order. And speaking about the New World Order, I do remember reading when Hitler said this will be a new world order. So we should be very careful about the New World Order because it means to us, from the non-aligned countries, the so-called underdeveloped countries, New World Order means more suffering, more indebtedness, more economic chaos, and more political instability. To go back in my narration of my going home, I really expected to see some progress in terms of peace. I figured at the time that now that there are going to be negotiations, there's hope for a new change of government, there's going to be a one person, one vote. Instead, I read in the papers that violence of a different kind had just developed. Now when I say I read in the papers, it's because the region where I come from, which is in the middle of the country, which is even more conservative in terms of African relationship, was not involved in violence. The violence happened to be in those very industrialized areas of South Africa, meaning there must have been a reason that there should be violence in that area. Having come home with this enthusiasm for peace, it was very disheartening and very disappointing to find that there was quote-unquote black-on-black violence. Well, it didn't take too many weeks for one to realize there's a hidden hand which has been working in South Africa for the past 3 years. There's a third force that is determined to derail the progress of the revolution in South Africa. In fact, since most of us had wished for a peaceful change as opposed to a violent revolution, which brings in its aftermath destruction of property, destruction of the economy, destruction of life. Here we now come to a stage where we can now peacefully resolve what we had been fighting for the past 80 years or 82 years. At any rate, it has been proved during the past 2 weeks that the third force is run, directed, and financed by people in high government positions, especially the arm of the police, the intelligence service, and the army. And when I say the intelligence service, I mean something similar to the CIA in South Africa, combined with the FBI. It's been proved beyond doubt when the ANC and the other liberation movement kept on saying there is no black on black violence. Instead, those people who are causing this so-called black on black violence are bent on giving the international community the impression that we told you Africans cannot rule themselves, which is the same propaganda they gave about Angola, Mozambique, Zimbabwe, even lately Namibia. And that is why they caused these wars of destruction in Mozambique, to prove a point: blacks cannot rule themselves. Angola the same, to prove a point: blacks cannot rule. Zimbabwe, destabilization in Zimbabwe and Zambia, to prove the same point: blacks cannot rule. Namibia, we all know the months just before elections, there was more destruction within Namibia of human life than it was for the previous 5 years. Or again to prove blacks cannot rule. Now, to emphasize that blacks cannot rule, they're going to destroy democracy, as is known in South Africa, democracy. They're going to destroy free enterprise. Free enterprise. And I mean free enterprise in quotes because we have monopoly economy in South Africa. That means who owns all the diamonds in South Africa, who owns the gold, uranium, etc., the copper mines, etc., all the way to the Congo, or shall we say Zaire. This is to make the Western countries, and when I say the Western countries, I include Japan, although Japan is way out there in the Far East. And the Japanese, of course, they were honorary aliens. Having been honorary aliens, the people who supported Hitler, when they took power in South Africa, they made the Japanese honorary white. So there is no coincidence that the Japanese are so closely linked with the apartheid regime in South Africa. Now this brings us to the New World Order, which somehow tends to tolerate the actions of the secret police in South Africa, which is supporting one political group against the other. One political thought against the other. As a result, we do not have peace as envisaged or as hoped for by those who fought for freedom for all these years. We do not have that peace, and we may not have that peace until pressure is brought upon those friends of South Africa who say de Klerk is killing apartheid or is destroying apartheid. When we look at the medical facilities, pension plans, education, the workplace, all these things are still intact, and they are still put under the same categories of white, colored, Indian, African. Even African is still divided into Zulu, Xhosa, and so on. We are saying, as Mandela said, and as this Africa Peace Tour also emphasizes, that the American community should put pressure on its own government and support Mandela and the others when they say, keep the pressure on until apartheid is totally dead and its democracy is irreversible. Thank you.
I'd like to remind everyone that there are some great T-shirts that these gentlemen have on, and ladies in the back. I see a whole stack of them over in the corner, and I do know that they're only $10 each. We may have to, in this country, on the campuses and in the communities, especially the communities of color, raise the issue of Southern Africa and South Africa and perhaps other parts, especially in the context of North-South discussions, the issue of death and violence and U.S. support of it in a much sharper fashion in the next months and years. I would urge that students on the campuses begin to consider this possibility and what kind of nonviolent activity could be put forward to provoke the media into looking closer at what's taking place in that country and at our concerns about our government's involvement in South Africa in attempting to undercut genuine democracy and to lock in, if you will, or support the locking in of historical minority privilege by some kind of minority veto without, and perhaps one of the keys might be is to watch and see if an elected constituency or a constituent assembly, an election that is for a constituent assembly is held. Not selected, but elected folks going to a venue and forming a new constitution. So in a way that people can buy into it, support it. That may be one of the central keys to whether or not democracy goes forward in South Africa. Our next speaker knows well what it means to have democracy restrained, derailed, if you will. He's again a great and good friend who had stayed with the Africa Peace Tour under the strains that it's undergone. He is the former Nicaraguan or Sandinista ambassador to all of Southern Africa. So from that special vantage point in Southern Africa, he was based in Harare, I believe, he